So, thank you to Nifty for holding a wonderfully villainous conference where I can go present such statist nonsense. Very appropriate, being at one of the wonderful state-built things. Really, it's very appropriate. But yeah, so background here. When you look at what proof of work mining is about, it's not about making new coins. And this is kind of a sort of myth, I think, comes a lot in sort of really beginner stuff to Bitcoin. They really latch on the idea that mining is about making the coins. And beyond that, well, I don't know, magic happens or something, right? And, I'll even admit, way back in the day when Adam Back, myself, Hal Finney, and all these guys were trying to invent Bitcoin and completely failing, to be clear, completely failing. This is something I made my own mistake on when I was a teenager. This proof of work thing, it's really important to make the new coins thing, and I just didn't get it. But more concretely, though, I think this is a very good paper talking about the instability of Bitcoin without the block reward, and that is to say that in the future, if all of your reward for mining comes from fees, the way this plays out is not stable. I'm not going to go into the full mathematical details, but I think the simple way to understand it is fees are inherently going to be unpredictable because blocks themselves are unpredictable. And you see this right now where, if a block takes a long time to find, fees just keep going up and up and up and up and up. And that means some blocks have way more fees than others. And the way the math works is that if blocks have more fees than others, it makes sense to reorganize the chain. And if it makes sense to reorganize the chain, bigger miners win this because they're the ones who can do that. The guys on P2 Pool, they can't. And as for block fees, well, they're not doing so great. Whether you look at fees in USD or BTC, sometimes they go way up, but for the most part, they're just not very high. And when you look at block fees versus subsidy, there's basically no time in Bitcoin's history where fees were really all that significant. Very brief periods, yeah, they kind of become significant, but overall they're just not. And it's just been this continuing decline where, from the point of view, say 51% attack resistance, there's no real story to say we have a great thing there. And from the point of view of instability, I'm sorry, but fees don't fix that problem. And yeah, no, inscriptions don't fix that either. And besides, Luke Jr. says we got to ban them, so, that's obviously not a solution. And a funny thing about them is even when fees have gone higher, this is one slide I took the screenshot years ago, and this is a more recent one. And as fees got higher, inscriptions, funny enough, became more efficient. Because fees do matter, even if you're trying to go scam people out of money with nonsense. So you change your scamming to go from full JPEGs to weirdo 4 bytes, reserve your 4-byte ticker or something. I didn't quite get it, but it's notable how as fees went up, that's kind of how they switched. Meanwhile, most of the people in this room are trying to go make fees go down by inventing stuff like ARC. So yeah, we're not really helping there either. So, what's a possible thing Satoshi could have done differently? Well, we could have done tail emission. And I think the term tail emission really came out of Monero. I'll talk about Monero a little later, but basically all that means is you have a fixed reward per block. You make a certain number of new coins per block, and that's that. Now, I'll bet you, had Satoshi done that in 2009, we'd still be talking about how Bitcoin is actually a stable monetary supply. It's non-inflationary. The Austrian people love it. It's just like gold, only better, because you can predict how much you have. And the interesting thing is, mathematically, this does converge to a stable monetary supply. Specifically, the reward converges to the rate of lost coins. And I've got some funny math here. You got your N, you got your T, you got your N0. You do some differential something or other equation on it, blah, 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 blah. I even have fancy symbols here, the little lambda thing, and I've got a little arrow to say well, this goes to that if you actually understand math. But there's a much easier way to understand it, which is the leaky bucket. Actually, hang on a second. All right, show of hands. How many people went on the dam tour? All right, so why am I talking about a leaky bucket? Why don't I talk about a dam? Now, as you can tell, this one's from Grok, because that does not look quite right. Yeah, we have an expert over here. Does it look right that there's just a wall of water that doesn't move? Close enough, okay. Yeah, okay. So, all right, so in a dam, if there hasn't been a multi-decade drought, there's water way up high, right? And as the rate of water goes up and down, the pressure down below increases, decreases. Well, the interesting thing is these things kind of cancel out. So like, as you kind of put more water in or less water in, it just converges to a stable level. Other than the whole drought scenario, but you know, that's the annoying thing. And what this means in terms of Bitcoin is if you have a stable amount of Bitcoin being created per unit time, like say per block, well, people lose coins in proportion to how many they numerically have, right? You know, your rate of lost coins isn't dependent on the number. It's dependent on the probability of you losing them or getting hit by a bus or looking too far over the dam wall and falling down. And that's a percentage, say like, I don't know, say 0.1% per year. And regardless of like how many new coins are created, eventually those numbers converge and you wind up with a stable monetary supply. Much in the same way as the level in that dam, if for a given amount of water, it's going to stay relatively stable. Other than the minor thing that guys like him actually control this actively, and this is a terrible analogy. But you get the idea, right? Now, when I talk to people about this on Twitter, they always seem to get hung up on the idea, well, like, how do you know this, right? Like, how do you know which coins are lost? Does it matter? Like, this is a math model. Does it matter, like, which H2O molecule kind of comes in and, like, comes out the other end of a dam or a leaky bucket or whatever? No, it doesn't. We just know this is true because that's what the math goes and tells us. And we can go model this stuff and we can be confident in this stuff because we're engineers, not, like, guys with fine arts degree, like myself. Now, Monero is interesting here because they did add tail emission after the fact. And part of how they could do that, first of all, is that Monero is relatively small and centralized. It doesn't have Bitcoin Twitter. And they actually had a really good reason, which is Monero wanted to do a floating block size. And if you're going to do a floating block size in a way that isn't stupid, you at least want to make miners give up something in return. I would still argue Monero's system's a little stupid, but at least if miners want to make the block size go up, they have to somehow sacrifice something. And that sacrifice was, well, the block reward. Now, in the long run, they can do stupid things, make the block size go up indefinitely and break Monero. But at least the first part of this makes some sense. And since they needed a block reward to make the system work, and a block reward goes on forever, they said, well, you know what, screw this. We're just going to pick some number. That's how many new coins we create. And notably, when they picked this number, I forget off the top of my head what the heck it actually was, but it was something like 0.3% inflation per year, not taking lost coins into account, which actually was lower last time I looked at this than Bitcoin is. I think the numbers might have converged a little because, of course, we're a little further along in the 4-year cycle. But it goes to show, these kinds of things aren't too dramatic. Now, let's suppose we actually did this on Bitcoin. What does this economically really mean? Now, I kind of say here, well, it's a stable monetary supply, but really what we're actually doing is we're taking the money that would go to lost coins in the long run and redirecting it to keep Bitcoin secure. Now, you can ask the question, will miners make enough? And I think the answer is this is really simple. We don't know. Like, is it enough money to take, say, 0.1% of the entire coin supply, redirect its security? Will that be enough to go and prevent this instability in fees? I honestly don't know. But what I can say is it's more likely to be true than not doing this at all. And when you're talking about the other type of proof of work security, 51% attack, again, it's the same kind of thing. Will miners make enough? I don't know. Is the amount of money Bitcoiners just lose every year by incompetence sufficient to resist government attack? I don't know. It depends on the government. right? Maybe it's Elon Musk who decides to go kill Bitcoin because he wants Dogecoin to exist. Maybe he does this through his space mining operation out in like the orbit of Mercury. I don't know. But I can at least say we're more likely to be in a position where things are okay than we are now. Now, can Bitcoin add tail emission? Who here thinks Bitcoin Twitter is toxic? Do you think it's toxic enough to kill tail emission? What about in 10 years when this is actually a problem and not just something that Nifty uses to go and pad out her event schedule? I mean, I'm not expecting this to get implemented tomorrow, believe me. But maybe in 10 years, when we're further along the cycle, maybe these things start mattering more. Now, let's say Bitcoin Twitter is too toxic. I have another solution, which is you do demurrage. So, demurrage is a tax on savings, just like inflation. Anyone who told you that inflation is not a tax on savings is lying to you. And unlike tail emission, it can be implemented in a backwards compatible soft fork. Now, remember, tail emission means that for the coins you own, a certain percentage of them essentially get inflated away, and it just happens to be that percentage is equal to the people, the rate that would be lost. So yes, you are losing out in the sense that you're not getting the benefit of other people's mistakes. Demurrage, you just say, well, let's just take your coins and tax them. Well, how do you go do this? Well, with this bullshit math equation. All I'm really saying is just take in a block the sum of all of the values spent times how long they've been in existence and just multiply it by some number, right? And that's approximately a tax on savings. You tax how long you've had the thing. Now, if you want to get fancy, maybe you do this with some curve or something, I don't know, but a linear thing's fine, it's close enough. And the way you would implement this in a soft fork rule is you say, the rule is this amount of coins must be in an approximately anyone can spend output in the Coinbase. And then you add one more rule, some probably more complex rule, saying these so-called anyone can spend things can then be redeemed by miners as sort of some big pool of funds that gradually goes back to miners. And that combination basically takes a percentage of the coins spent, puts in some big averaging thing that averages this out over a long period, and gradually the miners get this back. Mathematically, it's basically the same thing as tail emission. It's not precisely the same thing, but the differences don't really matter. Now, what is interesting with demurrage is you do have to kind of pick a number. Tail emission is just kind of a magical thing. Like, it will end up being the rate of lost coins. It might take a while to converge there, but it will be that eventually. Demurrage, you got to pick a number. Well, let's pick a number. Let's say you're talking about a human lifetime. That is, humans right now, I'm not taking medical advances into account, but as long as we're not vampires, 50 years is a reasonable guess for how long you might be saving over your whole lifetime. Well, if you compound 0.1% over 50 years, that's like 5%. If you compound 1% over 50 years, that's like 64%. I don't know, 64 sounds kind of bad. 5% though, I can afford 5% to keep my money safe. It's the thing I always say about taxes, if they're low enough, people are going to go pay them as long as it's not too much of a pain in the ass to figure out what you owe. If your taxes are high enough that people don't pay them, maybe that's a sign you're spending too much money. And 5% is kind of number where, I don't know, it doesn't really matter that much, especially over 50 fucking years. In over 50 fucking years, chances are the value of your coin in relation to other things you care about, be it hamburgers or US dollars, is going to, make this 5% thing not really matter. Speaking of, look at the Bitcoin price. Of the amount Google, it kind of says like up 16,000% or whatever. Google, of course, is wrong there. It's up fucking infinity since I knew about Bitcoin, since it didn't have a value. But yeah, it's been up a lot. Up a lot more than 5%. Do you think 5% over 50 years is going to be noticeable? No, it's not going to be. Now, can we implement demurrage? Well, miners can just do it. Remember, it's a soft fork. What's Luke Jr. going to do about it? Oh, right. No, we'll do an activation client that, tries to like do something and no one will care. Good luck on that. That's an interesting question. Now, should the Bitcoin supply be changed? Well, I've got a wonderful quote from Andrew Polstra way back in, I don't know, I think the quote was actually like 2020 or something maybe. It's a scary phase change that no other coin has gone through. He said that at tabconf, and I said, you should have perpetual inflation. Like 1% per year is fine. 0.5% per year is fine. I think 1% is a little more optimistic than some people with how much Bitcoin is going to go up, but whatever, it's all good. Now, Andrew Polstra did say that. I'm not sure he necessarily would like me to repeat that, but whatever. But again, this is all about proposing things, and maybe eventually we go do this. And with that, there's also another Andrew Polstra quote I have. I hate being on panels with podcasters because I'm worried they'll trick me into saying something stupid. And yeah, kittens aren't adorable. You can quote me on that. I mean, look at that kitten. Scary. So, questions? Uh-oh.
Great talk. Love it.
That's not a question.
No, I'm getting there. So my question is, there's a lot of other ideas out there for stabilizing miner revenue as we go through this scary phase transition. Do you
Can
think
you list some of those ideas?
Sure. So one would be using something like Jeremy Rubin's congestion control trees so that we even out fees across blocks. So even when the blocks are delayed, the fees don't spike and the following blocks have more fees still for them. Or that doesn't change the fact that lots of people just want the transaction to happen next. I mean, that's not so much about stabilizing miner revenue, it's providing certain people with options to go and do something differently. Well, it delays certain people's transactions to a later block because you can put the congestion control fee in and then they can claim later. So then that takes the pressure off the current block. But again, let's be clear. I mean, this is very much an opt-in thing saying, if you're in this narrow use case, maybe you'll do this. But and I got to point out, one of the weird things about fees is, remember, fees are per byte. But the value to someone is as a percent. And this is one of the things you see happening in transactions these days. Even though we've had years of figuring this out, lots of entities pay insanely high fees because they just can't be asked to go fix their fee estimates. And if you're doing $1 million transactions, does the difference between like 10 cents and $10 matter? No, it doesn't. Those are exactly the sort of people who aren't necessarily going to care about congestion control, but still are going to bid up fees really high. And this is why that's just not a solution. Now, if you have another solution, I'd love to hear. I mean, I've also heard people talk about proposals to have miners essentially do hash rate futures so that they're pooling their hash rate and getting long-term futures on the overall average fees. Or there's talk of using transaction sponsors where you use sponsorships would also levelize fees.
But hash rate futures, again, it doesn't actually change the fact that if I'm a big miner and that doesn't really matter so much to me, I am earning more money by doing a reorg. Like, yeah, you might go do a hash rate future, but you're still at a disadvantage because you've got to go through the hash rate future versus my Hoover Dam powered massive mining pool.
So basically you're saying that none of these other proposals for levelizing fees are compelling to you versus demurrage or tail emissions.
I mean, I'd love someone to come up with
that
one,
was my
but
question.
I've heard of many proposals, they're just not there yet. And I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not making the claim that either tail emission or demurrage is guaranteed to solve the problem. I'm just saying it's guaranteed to solve the problem more than the status quo.
Are you concerned about the layman's religious clinging to the 21 million thing? Like, how the hell are you going to convince people to burn their hats?
Yeah, I think that's your answer. It's like Demirage is the plan B. I mean, plan zero is hopefully I'm just wrong and like this is just not an issue and all we've done is like pad out conference tracks. But there's a reasonable chance I'm right. In which case, it's nice that Demirage can do this. In tail emission, yeah, maybe you could, but it's probably a better example for like people trying to go replace Bitcoin with something else. Although the history of that is just littered with people failing to do so, mainly because their incentives usually are to just scam people out of money with pre-mines. So I don't know. That's a weird thing, but it is interesting to see Zcash fix part of Bitcoin's emissions model, which is to at least make it smooth rather than the halving every 4 years, but then still have it go down to zero. Monero is the only thing I can think of that said, well, let's just do something halfway sane. Does Dogecoin have tail emission? Maybe it does.
They did. They forked it the same. Wasn't it? They forked the same. It's the same amount. Yeah. But they forked it. They forked it like a constant.
Okay.
Every block is the same amount. So.
Shit, maybe I have to go give credit to Dogecoin. All right, Monero is the serious one that got it right. Other stuff, I don't know.
Can you expand on the specifics of the soft fork mechanism?
Yeah, so it's deceptively easy, which is to say the part where you basically transfer the fund, or basically you do the taxation, is you say for a block, I'll go back. For a block, let's add up the total value of every coin spent times the amount of time it was in existence. You'd probably do that in blocks, right? So you're essentially saying Satoshi's product with block. And then you say, let's take some percentage of that, and that is your total tax collected. And the trick is, if the consensus rule says an output must exist in the Coinbase, or sorry, not necessarily Coinbase, must exist in either Coinbase or something else, putting that money in, then you give miners the flexibility to figure out, well, how the heck do we actually collect this? Now, what that means is when you look at like child pays for parent situations, you may not want to restrict how exactly a transaction is structured. You might want to make the thing that pays it actually be like some child 3 steps down or maybe some out-of-band fee. It doesn't really matter. All the consensus rule needs to care about is, yes, there exists an output that sums up to greater than or equal to the amount necessary. And yes, maybe the way we do this is actually like you can have multiple of these outputs and you just sum up the total amount. But the important thing is just you don't constrain how, you just constrain you're putting money into that pool. Now the second part of it is it should be a pool because you want to take this funding source and then average it out over time. And then say, well, miners can then spend these outputs at a certain rate as a percentage of the funding pool. And that turns a source of coins into a nice stable supply. It's not perfectly stable, but if you average it over, say, 2-3 years, it'd be pretty stable. Does that make sense?
Can you describe a bit how the block would change? Like where and how are you adding the outputs? Just a little more specifically.
Well, the important thing is I'm saying from the consensus rule point of view, the consensus rule just wants to go check to really check like two things. Is this money, or how much money do we owe in the tax? And is an output or one or more outputs being created that fund at least that amount? Now, the way miners would do that in practice would probably depend on exactly how they want to collect it. Most likely, they'd just say, well, when we look at a transaction group, this is just part of the transaction fee necessary. So rather than having a transaction fee of purely the fee and then order that way, you'd say, well, part of that fee has to be paid based on the amount of coins being spent. The other part of the fee is just your per byte incentive to get a transaction in. And that's the key thing which allows child pays for parent to work in this situation. To be clear, I'm not saying that wouldn't be kind of a pain in the ass to implement, but at least it's possible.
couldn't you apply the like pooling and smoothing out mechanism to transaction fees themselves to solve the instability problem?
Nah, you can't because people can always pay fees out of band. It's a good idea, but it has one fucking fatal flaw that's really annoying.
Can't we use a quantum computer to redistribute your coins? Or, I mean, Satoshi's coins to pay the fees?
You can, but the problem is that quantum computer, it's going to run out of coins, so. Yeah, it's going to run out of coins to redistribute.
You'd have to.
I mean, that's the same problem with socialism in general. You eventually run out of coins to redistribute.
So when I have my Lightning channel that's been open for 50 years, I'm going to have some problems on layer 2 to layer 1, right? Because there's going to be less coins in the
Well,
output.
this is why Demarize sucks compared to tail emission.
It breaks Lightning. Yeah.
Now, I got to make a point. Lightning implementations screw this up. It's very common that they will not take fees into account to see what is your true actual balance. And we see this, even ordinary wallets screw this up. If you have many, many UTXOs, your true balance is less than the sum of those UTXOs. And bizarrely enough, it even changes day to day.
Right.
So yeah, this kind of sucks, but at least it's a suckiness that we can bring in gradually. And the way it will play out for Lightning implementations that do not take this into account is, well, that's funny. When I try to go close my channel, the fees are kind of high. And if good Lightning implementations have a way to go just force this by paying higher and higher fees.
There you go.
When is the activation client going to be available for us to run?
Do I look like someone who wants to do actual work? Yeah, give it 10 years when this matters. I mean, Bitcoin monetary inflation rate's still, 0.5%, 0.25% or something? I mean, my guess is none of this is going to matter till it's at least under 0.1%. Probably less, but it's hard to say. Maybe it will matter sooner. Thank you.